Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I covered the evacuation of Nashville and the concentration of Confederate forces at Corinth, Mississippi, and the buildup of Union forces at Pittsburg Landing along the Tennessee River. Now I begin the Battle of Shiloh. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Although Albert Sidney Johnston was the commander of the now named Army of the Mississippi, he allowed Pierre-Gustave Toutant-Beauregard to organize the march to Pittsburg Landing, where Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Tennessee camped. Johnston also allowed Beauregard to lay out the battle formation. The army moved out on April 3rd in a confusing mass of humanity, units marching and countermarching, attempting to fit within the puzzle that Beauregard had laid out. Braxton Bragg's corps and John C. Breckinridge's corps moved out on the Corinth Road to the east, while Leonidas Polk and William Hardee traveled on the Ridge Road. The army met up at Monterey. It was April 5th, and the Confederates sent out skirmishers to fill out the Union position. Some Federal pickets caught Confederate prisoners and locked them in the Shiloh church. Despite the sounds of skirmishing and the astonishing amount of rabbits, deer, and other wildlife moving through their encampment because of the maneuvers of the rebel army, the Federals did not realize the entire Confederate army was less than a mile away from their position. It was on the evening of April 5th that Johnston happened upon a group of his corps commanders and Beauregard discussing withdrawing, fearing that they had lost the element of surprise. Johnston ended the discussion by stating, "Gentlemen, we shall attack at daylight tomorrow." As he was walking away, he remarked to a staff officer, "I would fight them if they were a million. They can present no greater front between these two creeks than we can, and the more men they crowd in there, the worse we can make it for them." His plan was to turn the Union army away from the river and the safety of their gunboats by driving in the Union's left flank, and, as he put it, "I intend to hammer 'em." On the morning of April 6th, the four rebel corps formed up with Hardee's brigades in front, Braxton Bragg's behind him, Polk behind him, and Breckinridge in the rear with the reserve corps. Instead of lining up parallel to the Union in a west to east orientation, they instead lined up in a northwest to southeast orientation, and this would play a significant role in the movement of the army in one simultaneous assault that Beauregard had planned. Nevertheless, not all of the Union forces were unsuspecting. Many brigade and regimental commanders sent out companies and larger units to reconnoiter the ground. One of those units was the 25th Missouri of Benjamin Prentice's command, who approached Fraley Field, discovering the 3rd Mississippi Battalion on the other end of the field opposing them. Each side let loose volleys at one another. Johnston recorded the time of those first shots at 5:14 a.m. The Battle of Shiloh had begun. They battled for about an hour before Prentice fell back a short distance. It was around 6:30 when the main Confederate line of Hardee's corps lurched forward against Peabody, but the movement was slow because of the dense undergrowth and undulating terrain that forced regiments to halt and realign their companies. Despite the overwhelming numbers, the rebels were moving amazingly slow against such an inferior force. The Union brigade fell back when confronted with the entirety of Hardee's corps, and now the perpendicular nature of the Confederate battle line became cumbersome. Beauregard emphasized keeping the lines together, but that was easier said than done, with shells exploding, bullets whizzing by the soldiers' heads, and the uneven terrain destroying the linear formations. Brigadier General Patrick Cleburne's regiments sat on the left of Hardee's line. During the advance, he swung abruptly north, breaking contact with Sterling Wood's men. Now Hardee had to swing his entire corps northward, all the while attempting to not disconnect his brigades. Therefore, Cleburne's troops became the first engaged. All the while, the rest of the men in the corps would lose valuable time and be unable to support him right away. Cleburne, an Irish immigrant who had served in the British military prior to immigrating to the United States, moved his men toward a valley containing the Shiloh branch, where he could see Sherman's encampment. As his men made their way toward the enemy, the brigade split to avoid the swampy area and to secure the flank, with 2 regiments going to the right and the other 4 shuffling to the left to avoid as much of the swampy area as possible. Cleburne's horse became stuck and threw the Irishman, and he barely extricated himself and his mount. Sherman, now drawn to the sounds of battle, wanted to see for himself what engagement had erupted. Cleburne's skirmishers, seeing the mounted gentleman, fired, hitting Sherman in the hand and killing his escort, Thomas Holliday. After that brush with death, Sherman wasted no time in preparing his men for battle. By this point in the engagement, the Confederate plan to keep their front-line brigades in contact with one another had fallen apart. Cleburne's men had broken off from Wood's brigade because the terrain forced him on a more northerly route. His right two regiments launched 3 assaults against the Ohioans to their front, but got repulsed badly, eventually forcing both regiments to fall back. Of the 425 men the 6th Mississippi took into combat, 300 had either been killed or wounded. The 70% casualty rate gave the nickname to that unit, the Bloody Sixth. Braxton Bragg's brigades were close behind Cleburne's men, and after the Irishman's troops failed to dislodge the Union defenders, Bragg sent Patton Anderson's brigade to the front, and together, both brigades slammed into Sherman's troops. But the repulse was another bloody one for the Confederates. Seeing that Hardee's corps' left flank was in the air, Bragg had sent the brigade of Colonel Preston Pond in a big swinging motion out to the west to secure the battle line. It would come in contact with John McDowell's brigade very soon. Brigadier General Daniel Ruggles, Anderson's division commander, begged Brigadier General Bushrod Johnston of Polk's corps to send his brigade to help Anderson and what was left of Cleburne's brigade to push back the Yankees. Johnston's men attacked just to the right of the other 2 brigades. No headway could be made, however, and the Union batteries played havoc in the Confederate ranks. Johnston sent Blythe's Mississippians and the 154th Tennessee to outflank the Union regiments, but Johnston's left began to give way and most likely would have broke if Lieutenant Colonel Robert Charles Tyler of the 15th Tennessee hadn't drew his pistol to force his and the other regiments to reform. Tyler would have 3 horses shot out from under him and would soon become wounded himself, having to be removed from the field. The reformed units would attack again, but got pushed back, taking heavy casualties, especially in the form of officers. Bushrod Johnston himself would be wounded, shot in the stomach. An odd reunion of sorts took place as the wounded Johnston rode to the rear. He found his way to a hospital where, as chance would have it, 2 of his former students from the University of Nashville were lying wounded, awaiting the overworked surgeon. The students were members of the 6th Mississippi, and when they saw their former professor arrive, they helped him from his horse and laid him on the ground. After conversing with him for a few moments, he asked if they could get a Yankee newspaper from his back pocket that some members of his regiment had picked up from the battlefield. The surgeon then called the boys to be examined, and they left him laying on the ground, wounded, reading the newspaper. The Confederate lines were disorganized, with each regiment that attacked through the valley losing a considerable amount of men. Some brigades were just a hodgepodge of what men could be pulled together without regard for which regiment they were in. Desperate to find more men to launch at the well-defended troops of William T. Sherman, the brigade of Colonel Robert Russell was sent to the front, to the north end of Ray Field to support what was left of the rebel right flank. The terrain again disrupted an attack. Russell's men dove down into the valley of the Shiloh branch, when, to avoid the swampy terrain, his right 2 regiments splintered off to the east, while the 11th Louisiana advanced on the Union battery which had been delivering destruction to the Confederates all morning. The Louisianians were thrown back in confusion. Colonel Samuel F. Marks of the 11th, who had lost his right arm at the Battle of Belmont, now lost his left arm in the bloody assault. The 22nd Tennessee had finally extricated itself from the swamp, and together they prepared for an assault. Sherman had held on brilliantly, utilizing the terrain to the best of his advantage, and had held off attacks by 4 Confederate brigades over the course of 2 hours. One soldier would name the little valley created by the Shiloh branch the Valley of Death. As Russell's men were coming up to support the Confederate right flank in this sector, Major General John A. McClernand sent messengers to Sherman, asking what the situation was, and when McClernand started seeing wounded and shirkers moving through his camp north of Sherman, he sent Colonel Julius Wraith's brigade to extend the Union line to the east. Now Sherman was prepared to throw back any Confederate unit that came against him. However, to the east, the division of Brigadier General Benjamin Prentiss was not so fortunate. More Confederate brigades were converging on his position.